When temporary teams make permanent decisions, what F1 stewards can teach any organization that asks rotating groups to make consistent, high stakes calls by Experiences XO. Formula One gives race stewards the authority to change results, championship points, contractual bonuses, and professional reputations decided by panels of volunteers who mostly rotate race to race. The real problem sits above any single penalty. Formula One asks temporary groups to apply one championship-wide standard under time pressure and public scrutiny, with almost no infrastructure for one weekend's panel to learn from the last ones. Paying and professionalizing the panel would help, but it would not make controversy disappear. The 2026 FIFA World Cup ran with fully professional referees and extensive video review, and still produced a disputed VAR decision serious enough that soccer's own rulemaking body admitted the protocol had been misapplied, an admission FIFA itself is now publicly contesting. Better tools change the conditions for judgment, not the organization's job of designing the process, explaining the calls, and showing it has learned from what it got wrong. How Formula One's regulatory system works. Formula One separates its commercial operation from its sporting regulation. The company runs media, sponsorship, and the event product. The FIA writes and enforces the sporting, technical, and safety rules. A race weekend splits responsibility across several roles. Stewards sit at the end of that chain. They investigate incidents and decide whether penalties follow. A standard separation of duties where the people running the events aren't the ones judging violations of it. The panel runs 4 or 5 people per race. Most FIA appointed include the chair, with the host country's sporting authority typically supplying at least one member. One seat is reserved for a former Grand Prix driver, rotating among a small group with direct racing credibility. That's a reasonable mix on paper: international, former driver, and local. What doesn't carry over is the panel itself, which changes most weekends. So Formula One is really running a rotating network of officials, not a standing judicial body. Temporary teams with permanent authority. In organizational design, decision rights determine who has authority to decide, what information supports it, and who's accountable. Formula One stewards hold real decision rights. Time penalties, grid penalties, reprimands, disqualifications, decided collectively and issued as one ruling, individual votes never disclosed. The setup resembles a temporary expert team assembled for one high-stakes assignment, credentialed, but rarely having worked this exact combination before. Organizational psychologists call this swift trust, a group performing before members build working relationships, running instead on qualifications and confidence in each other's competence. That's a fine substitute for experience when the task is predictable. A worse one when the call sits right on the line between hard racing and a punishable move, which is most of what stewards adjudicate. Rotation isn't a design flaw on its own. It brings different perspectives and stops any panel from developing a fixed read on a team or driver over a season. What it doesn't build is shared judgment. A stable team learns how its members weigh a borderline call, and that tacit knowledge doesn't survive the panel disbanding on Sunday night. The problem is narrow. Whatever one weekend's panel learns has to outlive that panel. Honorary service and organizational risk. Formula One stewards mostly serve without pay, officially in what the FIA's own rules call an honorary capacity. That doesn't make them amateurs. Many have spent years building expertise through racing, law, or national and international officiating. The organization draws on real professional judgment while funding almost none of the costs of retaining it, a gap that gets harder to justify as the stakes rise. A ruling now plays out across global broadcast and social media within minutes, with real money attached. There's a sharper version of the problem in who these people are off duty. The FIA recruits for outside credibility, broadcasters, lawyers, former competitors, then has to police that same work for conflicts of interest. A modest stipend doesn't resolve that. It just adds pocket money on top of whatever career is paying the bills, which is also whatever career is generating the conflict. An organization that wants this much availability and independence is closer to an employment relationship than a volunteer one. Why technology doesn't remove the judgment call. Stewards can pull broadcast footage, onboard video, telemetry, radio, and driver statements, backed by published FIA guidelines that give the panel shared definitions before a case comes up. That's decision architecture. The organization pre-structures judgment rather than leaving 4 people to invent a standard from scratch every weekend. What none of it does is make the call for them. Data can show where a car was and how it was driven. It can't decide whether that crossed a threshold that's inherently a matter of degree. The 2026 FIFA World Cup is the same lesson at a much larger scale. Full-time professional referees, years of preparation, layered video review, and the tournament still produced a genuinely disputed call. VAR intervened to send off Switzerland's Briel Embolo in the quarterfinal against Argentina, and soccer's lawmaking body, IFAB, later stated that the protocol didn't actually apply to the situation. What makes the case sharper than an ordinary mistake is what happened next. FIFA publicly pushed back on its own rulemaking body's admission, defending the original call rather than accepting the correction. 2 governing institutions, each with a different stake, reached different conclusions from the same replay. Technology had already shown both of them the identical footage. The disagreement started after that. Consistency and institutional memory. Consistency splits into 3 promises: the same rules for everyone, comparable review for comparable cases, and rulings whose differences trace back to the facts, not just a different panel. That third one draws most of its criticism, since 2 incidents can look identical from a broadcast angle while differing in speed, positioning, or reaction time. A credible system doesn't need identical outcomes. It needs to name clearly what fact changed the result. That's also the core of procedural justice, an idea that extends well past sport. People accept a ruling against them more readily when they believe the process was neutral and would have applied the same way to anyone else. Formula One already publishes its written rulings more transparently than most regulators offer, but doesn't connect them. Each document sits alone, tied to one event, with no index back to the last comparable case. So anyone without a private archive is left reconstructing the standard from memory. A professional core model. The real choice isn't between one fixed panel and constant rotation, although the debate is usually framed that way. A permanent panel buys continuity at the cost of a group that can calcify into fixed interpretations and a reputation for favoring particular teams. Full rotation buys independence at the cost of shared judgment. Neither alone is obviously right. A hybrid keeps the current mix of international, former driver, and host nation expertise, adding a small paid core that works across the season, a recurring international steward carrying season-long conflict, alongside the rotating driver steward seat and host nation member. That core's job wouldn't stop at race weekends, reviewing past rulings, comparing similar cases, running after-action reviews between races is work a volunteer panel structurally can't do. Pair it with a searchable precedent system organized by incident, type, and fact, and a later ruling that departs from an earlier one can say why. Individual votes stay confidential, and the collective reasoning shouldn't have to. This doesn't make disagreement go away. It gives each panel something to inherit from the one before it, which the current structure never has. Lessons for leaders. Number 1, temporary teams need permanent memory. Rotation protects independence, but a group that disbands after every assignment can't accumulate the shared read a stable team builds for free. If the work repeats, but the people don't, someone has to build the memory on purpose. Number 2, fairness depends on explainable differences, not identical outcomes. People don't need every similar case decided the same way. They need the organization to name the fact that makes this one different. Number 3, intrinsic motivation can quietly cover for a structural gap. People doing demanding, high-stakes work out of professional pride will keep showing up long after the arrangement stops making sense for anyone but the organization relying on them. Formula One stewards do difficult work in public under real-time pressure for no salary. The sport has already built professional systems around safety, technical scrutiny, and broadcast. Stewarding now carries enough financial and reputational weight to earn the same treatment. Paying people won't fix disagreement on its own. What it can fund is the reasoning, the connection between one decision and the last, that earns a kind of trust a good outcome alone never does.